Wild West Freedom by Ashton Drake. The setting sun painted the Wyoming sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple as Rebecca Matthews pulled her wagon to a halt at the edge of Thunder Creek. Her honey-colored hair, now escaped from its neat bun, whipped around her face in the evening breeze. 3 days of hard travel from Cheyenne had left her exhausted, but the sight of the small frontier town sparked a flutter of hope in her chest. "Almost there, Shadow," she whispered to her tired mare, patting the horse's sweaty neck. The animal nickered softly in response, as if sharing her relief. Thunder Creek wasn't much to look at. Just a scattered collection of wooden buildings straddling the dusty main street. But to Rebecca, it represented everything she'd left Boston to find: independence, purpose, and a chance to prove herself as more than just another society lady destined for an arranged marriage. The letter in her reticule crinkled as she reached for it, though she hardly needed to read it again. The words were burned into her memory. Position available for schoolteacher in Thunder Creek. Room and board provided. Single women preferred. It wasn't the most romantic invitation, but it was her ticket to freedom. As she urged Shadow forward, the wagon's wheels creaking through the rutted street, Rebecca couldn't help but notice the curious stares from the townspeople. A woman traveling alone was unusual enough, but one dressed in what remained of her fine Eastern clothes must have been quite a sight. "Can I help you, ma'am?" The deep voice startled her, and Rebecca turned to find herself looking into the most striking pair of green eyes she'd ever seen. They belonged to a tall man with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin, his dark hair slightly too long to be fashionable. A silver badge glinted on his vest, the sheriff's star. "I'm Rebecca Matthews," she managed, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm here about the teaching position." The sheriff's expression shifted from curiosity to something warmer, though a hint of concern lingered in his gaze. "Luke Hawkins," he introduced himself, touching the brim of his hat. "We weren't expecting you for another week." "I made good time," she replied, lifting her chin slightly. She wouldn't let him see how nervous she was, how her heart had started beating faster the moment he'd appeared. Luke's lips curved into a half-smile that made her pulse skip. "Well, Miss Matthews, welcome to Thunder Creek. Let me help you down from there and we'll get you settled at Miss Wilson's boarding house." Before she could protest, he'd stepped forward and placed his hands on her waist, lifting her effortlessly from the wagon seat. The contact, though brief, sent a shock through her system that had nothing to do with the evening chill. "Thank you, Sheriff," she murmured, smoothing her skirts and trying to regain her composure. "Luke," he corrected, still wearing that devastating smile. "We're not much for formality out here." The next few days passed in a whirlwind as Rebecca settled into her new life. Mrs. Wilson, a plump widow with sharp eyes and a kind heart, took her under her wing, helping her transform the abandoned church into a proper schoolroom. Word spread quickly through the small community, and soon she had 15 students enrolled, ranging from 6 to 16 years old. What she hadn't counted on was Luke Hawkins's constant presence in her life. He seemed to be everywhere, fixing the schoolhouse roof, delivering firewood, or simply stopping by to check on her progress. Each time their paths crossed, that same spark of awareness flared between them. "You're doing good work here," he told her one evening as they stood on the schoolhouse porch watching the sunset. "These kids needed someone like you." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm at the praise. "I hope so. It's so different from what I imagined teaching would be like in Boston." "Different better or different worse?" Luke asked, studying her face with those penetrating green eyes. "Better," she admitted. "Here I feel like I'm making a real difference. In Boston, everything was so prescribed. Proper young ladies teaching proper young ladies how to be even more proper." She wrinkled her nose, making him laugh. "Somehow I can't picture you being proper all the time," he teased. "You'd be surprised," she retorted, but couldn't help smiling. "My father had my whole life planned out. Marriage to a suitable gentleman, a house in Beacon Hill, children who would carry on the family name. When I saw the advertisement for this position, it felt like Providence itself was offering me an escape." Luke's expression grew serious. "It takes courage to leave everything you know behind." "Or foolishness," she said softly. "No," he shook his head. "I've seen enough of both to know the difference." Their conversations became a daily ritual, and Rebecca found herself looking forward to them more than she should. Luke wasn't anything like the polished gentleman her father had paraded before her in Boston. He was direct, sometimes blunt, but there was an underlying gentleness to him that showed in the way he handled spooked horses or spoke to frightened children. The crisis came 6 weeks after her arrival, when a spring storm turned Thunder Creek into a raging torrent. Rebecca was working late in the schoolhouse, grading papers, when Luke burst through the door, rain dripping from his duster. "River's rising," he said without preamble. We need to evacuate the lower part of town. I need your help with the children." They worked through the night, moving families to higher ground, comforting scared little ones, and distributing blankets and supplies. Dawn found them exhausted but triumphant. Everyone was safe, though several homes had been damaged. Rebecca stood at the edge of the flood waters, watching the sunrise paint the sky in familiar shades of gold and purple. She felt Luke's presence before she saw him, that awareness between them having grown stronger with each passing day. "You're shivering," he said, shrugging out of his coat and draping it over her shoulders before she could protest. "I'm fine," she started to say, but the words died in her throat as she looked up at him. His face was intent, serious, and somehow she knew what was coming even before he spoke. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I started falling for you the moment you rolled into town, looking like a princess who'd lost her way, and found exactly where she belonged instead." Rebecca's heart thundered in her chest. "Luke, you don't have to say anything," he continued. "I know this isn't what you came here for, but I've watched you these past weeks, seen how you've made this place your home, how you've touched everyone's lives, and I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore." She reached up, touching his face with trembling fingers. "I love you too," she whispered. "I didn't expect to find you here, but now I can't imagine being anywhere else." His kiss was gentle at first, then deeper as she responded, her arms sliding around his neck. When they finally parted, they were both breathing hard, and Rebecca could feel the rapid beating of his heart where her hand rested against his chest. "Marry me," Luke said, his voice rough with emotion. "Be my wife, my partner, everything you already are to my heart." Rebecca looked up at him, at this man who represented everything she'd never known she wanted, until she found it. "Yes," she said simply, and felt his arms tighten around her as he kissed her again. The town turned out in force for their wedding 2 months later. Rebecca wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Wilson had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair, instead of the elaborate veil her mother would have insisted upon. Luke's eyes shone with pride and love as he slipped his mother's ring onto her finger, and when they kissed, the cheers of their friends and neighbors echoed off the mountains. That evening, as they stood on the porch of their new home, the house Luke had been quietly building for weeks, Rebecca looked up at the star-filled Wyoming sky and smiled. She had come west seeking independence, and found something far more precious, a love as vast as the prairie, and as enduring as the mountains that watched over their small town. "Happy?" Luke asked, his arms around her waist as they swayed gently in the evening breeze. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she answered truthfully, leaning back against his chest. "This is where I belong." "This is where we belong," he corrected softly, and Rebecca smiled, knowing that her greatest adventure was just beginning.